The harsh sands, giving way beneath each step, make short journeys, never-ending treks. The beating sun during the day, and below freezing temperatures at night, make it deadly. Today, Egypt is over 90% desert. But it wasn't always this way. During the Neolithic period, the Sahara was a verdant landscape, inhabited by numerous hunter-gatherer and pastoralist societies. Over a couple of relatively short phases, the Sahara became drier and more arid, leaving it a desert. It's thought the existing groups in the region were forced to move to a more agreeable location. Many would end up here, on the Nile Delta. Settlements were built around the Nile, promoting a sedentary lifestyle. These early Egyptians were from the Afroasiatic family, the same primary language family as the Semitic peoples. Before long, these people took full advantage of the Nile's annual flooding. It was quite regular and predictable, unlike those of the Tigris and Euphrates of Mesopotamia. Early Egyptians would practice farming in the river beds the Nile filled with sediment. They would collect water in reservoirs and use irrigation to continue farming during the drier months. The presence of the Nile shaped Egyptian culture. Boats were the main mode of transportation and trade. Heavy items, like stone and basalt, could easily be sent and received over the water. Copper, gold, and flax was also prevalent in the area. They would soon come into contact with the Mesopotamian cultures. It was previously thought that the Egyptians borrowed elements of writing from Sumerian pictographs to create hieroglyphics, but we now believe that the Egyptians independently created their own writing system afterwards. By around 3200 BCE, Egypt had coalesced into two different regions. Lower Egypt resided in the north, and consisted of the Nile Delta and scrubland with grass and herbs. The capital was at Memphis. In the south, there was Upper Egypt, or the land of reeds. The capital was Thinis, and some theories suggest the region was ruled by the Thinite Confederacy, a group of tribal lords. What's more certain is that around 3100 BCE, a king Narmer, also called Menes, defeated the rulers of Lower Egypt, becoming sole king of a unified Egypt. The capital would be changed from Thinis to Memphis in Lower Egypt. This was the start of ancient Egypt's almost 3,000-year history. Many historians divide Egypt's past into its 31 dynasties, but we will look at it from the classic perspective of its three kingdoms, the three high points, or golden ages of Egypt. Egypt's first dynasties were part of the Predynastic era, but the Old Kingdom began with its third dynasty, around 2686 BCE. The man at the start of all this was King Djoser. He was pharaoh, but that term wouldn't be used until the New Kingdom. Djoser inherited the royal court at Memphis, filled with priests, bureaucrats, and tax collectors. Civilization and agriculture was advanced enough that the townsfolk always benefited from food surpluses. While there was a hierarchy in Egypt, as most other civilizations at the time, it was quite different from its Sumerian counterparts. In Sumer, those who ruled city-states were called Lugals. It's roughly translated as big man and describes a man who stands out from other men. In Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't anything close to a man. They were deemed a god. When the world was new, the god Osiris was given rule over it. In a fit of jealousy, his brother Seth killed Osiris and sent pieces of his body all across the earth. Osiris's wife, Isis, was able to partially resurrect Osiris, but not enough to remain on earth, and he became ruler of the dead. He did complete one other deed though, and Isis soon bore their child, Horus. Horus became the new ruler of the living world. Or so the story goes. In Egypt, the pharaoh claimed to be the living embodiment of Horus, and when he died, was thought to become the embodiment of Osiris. while his still living son became the new Horus. A clever ploy to maintain legitimacy. They were seen as intermediaries between the people and the divine, and the pharaoh was even thought to regulate the Nile itself, Egypt's very lifeblood. It was, after all, thanks to the Nile, that Egypt often had food surpluses. It was these surpluses that allowed Egypt to spend more resources on its elaborate architectural projects, like tombs and palaces. The pyramids would become the most famous. Before King Djoser, pharaohs had been placed at the necropolis at Abydos, in tombs buried into the ground, near the Abydos boats, to send them into the afterlife. When Djoser died, he was instead placed into his over 200-foot step pyramid near Memphis, built by Imhotep the architect, kickstarting a burial trend that would become the Egyptian trademark. Over 100 years later, during the next dynasty, the first king, Snefru, began building pyramids that were a bit different than the preceding ones. He made the tomb inside the pyramid itself, instead of beneath the ground, under the pyramid base. Aesthetically, he covered the pyramid sides with slick stone, to make the sides more smooth than Djoser's step pyramid. He commissioned 3 pyramids. The Red Pyramid, the Maiden Pyramid, and he created one of his own, but because of some measurement errors, or unstable sand, the pyramid has a bent appearance. His son, Khufu, would take his father's innovations, and build on it. A 20-year project, Khufu built the Great Pyramid, a 481-foot, giant masterpiece, utilizing thousands of skilled workers, and stones, weighing up to 15 tons each, brought from hundreds of miles away. The result was the tallest man-made structure for thousands of years. There are numerous conspiracy theories about the pyramids as well, but ancient cultures, including non-European, deserve more credit for what they were capable of, on their own merit. Khufu's son, Khafra, created what is arguably just as recognizable as the Great Pyramid. This limestone erection had the face of a human, but a body of a lion, and wings of a falcon. Known as the Sphinx, there have been numerous theories about why it was built, and if the face belongs to Khafra himself. The building of pyramids and grand tombs seems linked to not only the Egyptians' obsession with death, but of their great fear of it. Rituals around the deceased, like embalming and mummification, took over 2 months to complete. All this, in preparation for the journey to the great beyond. In the afterlife, Anubis would perform the weighing of the heart, and if one was deemed ethical and virtuous, they would proceed to the underworld with Osiris, towards immortality. If not, the heart was eaten by Amit, the devourer of the dead. She had the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, the torso of a lion, and the head of a crocodile, the 3 deadliest creatures the Egyptians had to contend with during life. Once the demon ate the heart, one's soul would become restless, forever. The main writing system was hieroglyphics, which would become fully developed during Egypt's next kingdom. Only the priest class was able to read these symbols, and they would remain undecipherable to the West for centuries, until the 1800s, when France, under Napoleon, took the Rosetta Stone. For everyday writing, scribes would use hieratic script. Lasting around 500 years, the Old Kingdom was a most stable time for Egypt. It would eventually start to decline though, during the 5th dynasty. A shift occurred when the king became more associated with the sun god Ra, which gave the priest class more power. During the 6th dynasty, last of the Old Kingdom, governors and other bureaucrats asserted even more power, failing to recognize the pharaoh as ruler, and governing as they pleased. It was around 2181 BCE that Egypt entered the first intermediate period, a period of decentralization and disunity. Smaller states centered in Heracleopolis, or Het Nesset, in Lower Egypt, and Thebes, or Waset, in Upper Egypt, would war with one another to rightfully claim legitimacy over the entire region. Temples were pillaged, and art destroyed. Multiple dynasties would control different parts of Egypt at the same time, while still, other governors controlled their smaller provinces. Invaders would also succeed in breaching the northeast. This intermediate period would last around 100 years, but out of Thebes, Mentuhotep II reunified Egypt, beginning the Middle Kingdom. It began around 2055 BCE, and would last for 400 years. His successor, Amenemhet I of the 12th dynasty, then moved the capital from Thebes to Ichitawi, near Memphis. He amassed enough power to continue pyramid construction, and fortifications were placed east of the Nile Delta to discourage any more invasions. Much of the Middle Kingdom seemed reminiscent of the Old, but the pharaoh never wielded as much power as in those times. The anarchy from the intermediate period made it clear the pharaoh was but a man, not a deity. This made decentralization still prevalent, with a class of noble elites also partaking in the afterlife rituals like the pharaoh. After the period of vulnerability, Egypt began campaigns of conquest to reclaim resources and secure their own borders. Under Senusret III, campaigns to the south saw Egypt drive down the Nile to the Third Cataract, annexing Lower Nubia in the north. The last pharaoh of this dynasty, Sobek-Nefru, was Egypt's first female ruler. With no apparent successor, after her death, Egypt would begin to decline with the end of the dynasty. With the Nile floods receding every year, pharaonic legitimacy was criticized. It was at this time of weakness that an invasion occurred. These people came in from the north, utilizing machinery the Egyptians did not recognize. These were military horse-drawn carriages, used for mobility and firepower during battle. These people were not the Indo-European Hittites we mentioned last episode, but a Semitic West Asian people, the Hyksos. They weren't large in number, but their war chariots gave them the advantage, and they would settle within Egypt's borders, kick-starting the Second Intermediate Period in around 1650 BCE. While they would control a large area, native Egyptians were kept on board to administer regions. Egypt was still concurrently run by numerous other dynasties, losing most of the land it had previously taken, and this might well have been the end of Egypt as we know it. But after around 100 years of fragmentation, the 18th dynasty would usher in the New Kingdom, around 1550 BCE, and a man who would secure Egypt for generations. His name was Ahmose I. Picking up on the previous dynasty's campaigns, Ahmose expelled the Hyksos from Egypt, but that was not enough. He followed them up to their own territories in the Levant, and defeated them there, turning the region into an Egyptian province. This also created a buffer to prevent enemies from easily getting into Egypt proper, like the Hyksos. This new kingdom would see Egypt enter another period of construction and art, but its military would most notably improve. Adapting Hyksos' chariot technology, the Egyptians would create these weapons of conquest for themselves, and used them so successfully, they are still seen as a mainstay of ancient Egypt, along with the Sphinx and pyramids. Regaining lost land in the south, Egypt would expand until the Fourth Cataract, this time, into Nubia. Under a series of powerful pharaohs, they would also expand further up the Levant. Here, they came into contact with the Mitanni, a group of Indo-Europeans, who were part of the Hurrians, living next to the Hittites. After the military campaigns, the Egyptians would instead pursue peace through marriage with the Mitanni. The new kingdom saw Egypt drop their isolationist tendencies, and this is why this period is sometimes called the Egyptian Empire. It's thought the invasion of the Hyksos not only influenced the Egyptian military, but their entire political ideology. Still in the 18th dynasty, under Queen Hatshepsut, the second female pharaoh we know of, Egypt would re-establish important trade routes to the land of Punt, near the Horn of Africa. She would also commission the first grand buildings of the Valley of the Kings, her most famous structure being the Djeser Djeseru, or the Holy of Holies. The 18th dynasty continued on with strong rulers, until a very different man emerged to the throne. Amenhotep IV. Refusing to give funds to the growing cult of Amun, he organized what some would call the first monotheistic state, dedicated to the sole worship of the sun god Ra. He changed his name to Akhenaten, after the Aten, the aspect of the deity which he worshipped. This wasn't simply a ploy to sap power from the cult of Amun. The pharaoh truly practiced this monotheism, and founded a new capital at Amarna, north of Thebes. The temple lacked a roof, so as to let in the sun's glory. His wife, Nefertiti, also participated in the rituals. Unfortunately for them, the religion was not widely accepted by Egyptians, and this Amarna period wouldn't last. Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's son, eventually became pharaoh, and reverted the official religion back to the Egyptian pantheon. His original name was in fact Tutankhaten, but he changed it to show his loyalty for Amun, not the monotheistic Aten. This one deed was popular enough to have him buried at the Valley of the Kings, and this tomb's discovery propelled him into becoming arguably the most popular pharaoh in modern times. Despite this, after his death in around 1323 BCE, the 18th dynasty petered out. Which brings us to where we left off last episode. To the north, the revitalized Hittites were expanding, making use of their iron weapons and chariots. They would annex Mitanni territory, destabilizing them enough that their state would never be the same, and dissolve. Hittites then marched down the Levant. In Egypt, the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty chose Ramses I as his successor, beginning the 19th dynasty. It would be under his successors, Seti I and Ramses II, that Egypt truly displayed its mettle. Seti had already conquered the city of Kadesh, but it was soon in Hittite hands again. Ramses then attempted to reconquer Kadesh once and for all. Egypt's second Syrian campaign brought them head-to-head with the Hittite army at this small expanse of land near the Orontes River, close to the Lebanon-Syria border. The Battle of Kadesh is still believed to be the largest chariot battle ever fought, and is one of the first documented battles in all of history, the Battle of Megiddo, also an Egyptian battle, being a notable exception. Both sides were evenly matched in manpower, but it's possible the Hittites had up to 4 times more chariots than the Egyptians. Even with this discrepancy, neither side could come out on top. So naturally, both declared themselves the victor. A peace treaty was formed, and Kadesh remained in Hittite hands. To keep up morale, and with no more true enemies, Ramses built numerous monuments, statues, and palaces in Egypt. Peace didn't remain for long. The next dynasty, the 20th, had to contend with mayhem that touched all the Mediterranean. The mysterious sea peoples were at the shore. Ramses III, most famous and decorated ruler of this dynasty, fought off the constant attacks from the delta, again and again. While many civilizations across the sea were gone forever, Egypt survived, but was a shell of its former self. Droughts would persist for decades after, along with famines. We would see the prevalence of corrupt bureaucrats, and even the first recorded labor strike. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings would be looted, while living pharaohs put their power into their priesthood. The last ruler of this dynasty, Ramses XI, was so weak that he became a prisoner to the high priests of Amun. The next dynasty would even begin to rule while Ramses was still alive. This was the end of the dynasty, and the end of the new kingdom, which broke apart into a third intermediate period. Egypt would live on, which was more than other civilizations could say, but this intermediate period saw foreign Libyans, from the west, become pharaohs, and out of Nubia, the Kushites would expand north, and become pharaohs themselves, as the 25th dynasty. Known as the Black Pharaohs, the Kushites would rule Egypt for almost 100 years. They would be the last dynasty before Egypt was taken over by the most ruthless force in the Middle East. From Mesopotamia, the Assyrians embarked on a mission of conquest, and with the use of iron weapons, took control of all Mesopotamia and the Levant, before defeating the Nubians in Egypt, creating the largest empire the world had yet seen, by the 600s BCE. This was the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Assyria would withdraw, but place native rulers, as vassals, back on the throne, ushering in Egypt's late period. While not a golden age like the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, there was a brief cultural resurgence. This did not last, as the Neo-Babylonians then supplanted the Neo-Assyrians as the dominant power, and soon defeated Egypt, Assyria's ally, at the Battle of Carchemish, in 605 BCE. They would never succeed in direct control over Egypt. Eventually, it was the Persians who overtook the entire region by the mid-500s BCE. We will get to this in an upcoming episode, so be sure to subscribe. So why did Egypt decline? Its greatest strength was ultimately its greatest weakness. The reliability and predictability of the Nile's annual floods mirrored Egyptian culture, leading to lack of innovation and a sense of comfort. So when faced with any hardships, like a drought or invasion, Egypt became fragile and fragmented relatively quickly. Despite their longevity, they were outpaced by the Babylonians in astronomy, began to utilize bronze later than other civilizations, and only accessed the potent chariot during the New Kingdom. It would, of course, be foolish to say 3,000 years of civilization wasn't a success. But this isn't to say Egypt left no legacy. One field in which they were uniquely skilled was medicine. Modern pharmacology is in debt to the early Egyptian healers and herbal experts. Egypt was also the first to divide the day into 24 hours, and the 365-day calendar, a system we still use. Architecture was also one of Egypt's strengths. They developed a variety of measurements, like the cubit, which were used to superb accuracy. Their sumptuous temples and palaces were magnificent, but it was their tombs and mortuaries that were truly one of a kind. Their Great Pyramid, a tomb dedicated to their obsession with death, is ironically the only wonder of the world to still survive.